Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and hey, I thought I was done with Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar series for this channel, but I'm not. So while I have not read the Spy series, mostly because I just hadn't really been feeling the impetus to do it, I was flicking through what was available in the library and stumbled across Founding of Valdemar Book 1. I have not, in fact, done the research to check if Mercedes Lackey has done books 2 and 3 yet, but here's book 1. The interesting thing about this is, of course, that we have some vague hints and bits about the founding of Valdemar, because, as has happened in several of Mercedes Lackey's books, in the course of Mage Winds, Mage Wars, possibly at the end of Mage Winds, there is some discussion about how Valdemar was founded, in that they see a particular coat of arms and they say, oh, well, that is apparently the coat of arms of the Eastern Empire, and we don't know anything about it except that it's big and bad and scary and in the East. And so, and in the course of that, and in the course of some stuff from the perspective of the Empire, the discussion, what we know is there was a baron, and his name was Valdemar, from a section that they called Valdemar, and that he and his people, for some reason unknown to the Empire at least, decided they were all going to just pick up and leave. This book is covering the story of why Baron Valdemar decided to pick up and leave. And the most interesting part of this is, in some ways, is the fact that the packing up and leaving fundamentally makes sense based on what we know of the Empire at the time of the Mage Storms series, and that is that you have this massive empire made up of many parts, with a single emperor at the top who is self-centered, who doesn't care about the governance of his people, who, it's one of those, massive empires that crushes all beneath their boot heels, and so on and so forth. And the thing is that Valdemar, his grandfather, had started coming up with a plan for them to escape. The problem was that in this universe where you have magic and everything else, how do you get away? Because, of course, if they just, pack everything into wagons and start trundling across the land, the Empire would catch up to them and round them up and kill some of them and force everyone else back. So that's not going to be an escape. It means you're going to have to leave. But if you gate away, as they like to describe it, creating gates only goes so far. And on top of which, most of the time you need to have somebody, you need to know where you're gating to. It's one of the great constants of basically any work of speculative fiction that has to do with things that are fundamentally teleportation. That is, I am in this place and then boom, I am in this other place, is you have to know where you're going. It's why in Harry Potter they have their whole destination deliberation thing. It's why in Star Trek you need transporter coordinates, and it's why in Valdemar, if you're going to gate, then you need to know where you're gating to. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, of course, the further away you gate, the harder it is to do it. So they have mages who have basically been sort of hiding out on Valdemaran lands to avoid being effectively eaten up by the Empire, who have been studying on building a gate out to a place so far away the Empire won't have even heard of it, so that they can escape to it. And so this book opens with a plan that has been building for literally generations, that the Baron's well, it turns out he's a duke. The Baron thing happens later. His grandfather started the plan, and they have been prepping to be able to roll everyone out, to get everyone out of the Empire on Valdemar lands for 2 generations. They've been figuring out how they're going to transport everybody, figuring out how they're going to house everybody, figuring out all of the logistics of moving large numbers of refugees all at once, and also figuring out how to time it and do it in such a way that the Empire hopefully won't notice they're gone until they've been gone long enough the trail goes cold, and also making sure that you leave as minimal a trail as you can. And so we open with the book, we open the book sort of with them in that position. And the interesting thing in this book is, to give it away, the way he goes from Duke to Baron is that the Emperor decides to forcibly demote him from Duke to Baron and promote somebody else in his place. But you have this forcible leaving, and they all just, and after much adventures and much drama and much political gamesmanship, they just leave. I think the most interesting thing, though, that comes up in this book, and by the way, by the end of this, we haven't gotten to the establishment of the Kingdom of Valdemar. By the end of this book, all we've gotten to is the establishment of all of these people from the Duchy of Valdemar having landed in the future Kingdom of Valdemar. But one of the most interesting things that happens in this is Mercedes Lackey, throughout all of these books, decades of these books, has always described the magical creatures Vrondi in a way that makes them sound like not particularly smart animals. They're kind of, like curious monkey type critters. They have some intelligence, but it's described as childlike and naive and, not brilliant. And in this book, they have been captured by the Empire to use as slaves. That in effect what they have done is they've created homunculi or some sort of, frame thing. And the Vrondi are captured and used to effectively power and provide intelligence to these mechanical servants. And they are aether plane creatures, so they're not wholly physical. So they kind of just take like this, creature that's made out of magic and magical gas, air stuff, and smoosh it down into a little tiny capsule and use it to power these things, which are, they're used to replace human servants because, of course, there's a lot of stuff that if you had a robot, you could replace a human person with it. And what happens is that they act with a human grade intelligence. And I find it intriguing because, among other things, it's a complete upset on how the Vrondi have been described, have been used, have been placed in these books until now, and I'm not wholly certain how I feel about it, if only because, you establish a world in a particular way, and doing this is potentially problematic, but the thing is, though, that, it turns out that the Vrondi sort of have a hive mind thing going, so there is an aspect whereby you sort of have multiplicative intellect, I suppose, that the more of them are gathered together in their hive mind, the smarter they all are individually or something. But anyway, they wind up being very, very key to this because they can use various devices floating around the Emperor's palace without anyone noticing, because we're pulling the old servants are beneath people's notice. And in this case, because the Vrondi have very specifically and carefully made sure that nobody thinks of them as being intelligent enough to do stuff, that they are thus treated that way and can basically do all kinds of things. They have been bound not to do particular things, but they have also not been bound with great specificity, so there's a lot of easy workarounds that they can do, and so they arrange to help Baron Valdemar get his people out, to help him get all of them out, to help him get all of his horses out, to help him get a bunch of political prisoners out. When he gets called up to the Emperor's palace, and when he gets there and he discovers that these servant dolls are actually captive Vrondi, he's like, okay, I'll free you all. And then he finds that a bunch of children... Now, he was one of these political captives. The Emperor's doing that old shtick of, we will educate your youth in our palace and happen to just hold them hostage against your good behavior. And Valdemar was a hostage as a child, but the hostages have been put into a worse situation than they were before. And so he says, well, I have to get all of these children out too. And then he finds the political prisoners, and it's like, this is a man who has something in his past, and it's not made wholly clear in these books, something that he feels ashamed of. And so he spends all of his time desperately stacking obligations onto himself because... And I feel like part of this is he's desperately trying to make up for stuff, and part of it is that he can't help himself. And it's sort of like the primary initial model for the notion of the Valdemar's heralds in the distant future, is these people who are the kind of people who cannot help themselves. They're always looking to do the right thing, compounding, trying to find ways to do even more of the right thing. You know, it's that he is sort of the prototypical herald, with also, of course, his friend who goes with him, who is his personal herald, who is, you know, what heralds actually were, which is people whose job is to, like, carry messages and announce stuff. One of those comments that gets made in the books is, you call them heralds, but they don't do a herald's job. They do other stuff. But it's sort of... He's designed as the prototype for the Valdemaran herald. And it's very, very clear that, you know, that how Mercedes Lackey is going to set up the initial stages of Valdemar the Kingdom. Also interesting, of course, is the fact that in this book, this upcoming series of books, however long she takes them, I suspect that Mercedes Lackey is not going to give me something that I had always kind of hoped if we ever got to see Baron Valdemar casting the spell that got them the first of the companions, and that is, I'd always sort of hoped for a high comedic moment, just this moment of, I have cast this spell, I have used up the magical reserves of myself and like 3 other people, and we have called upon every single god we've ever heard of and then some, and you guys sent me a horse. And yes, 30 seconds later, there would have been choosing and emotional explosions and divine whatnot, but I was really hoping for, and you guys sent me a horse. And we're not going to get it, if for no other reason than that this man is like a super horse guy. Like, he breeds horses, and he has these fancy horses called Valdemar Golds, which are apparently the awesomest horses to ever horse, at least within the bounds of the Empire. So he's probably going to be super impressed by, you know, companions when they finally appear, so I am disappointed. But, you know, it's a good book. It's fun. It's a rollicking start. It has the angriest dedication you will ever hear in your life. I am nearly out of time or I would read it. But you should absolutely check it out. So that's everything, and I will see you all next week.